They arrested me in my own kitchen on a Tuesday morning while I still had flour on my hands for making my nephew's birthday cake. My sister-in-law stood at the end of my driveway screaming that I had stolen her son. My brother stood behind her, arms crossed, not looking at me. And the detective who snapped the handcuffs on my wrists told me I had the right to remain silent, which was funny, because I had been silent my whole life, and nobody had ever told me that was a right before. 48 hours earlier, none of this existed. 48 hours earlier, I was just the quiet one, the reliable one. The one you called when everything fell apart and needed someone to hold the pieces together without asking too many questions. My name is not important. What I did with my life afterward, that's the part that matters. But first, you need to understand what they did to me and why I almost let them get away with it. I grew up in a house where my brother Caleb could do no wrong, not metaphorically, literally. When he crashed our parents' car at 17, they told the insurance company a deer ran out. When he forged my mother's signature on a loan application in college, my father paid it off quietly and nobody mentioned it again. When he married a woman named Fiona 3 years ago, my mother called her a firecracker, the way people call a controlled burn a campfire, meaning it was obvious to everyone except the people standing closest to it. I was the other one. The one who got decent grades and a nursing degree and an apartment I could actually afford. The one who remembered birthdays and showed up early to help set up and stayed late to help set up and stayed late to help clean up. The one who, when Fiona called me crying at 11 at night, always picked up the phone. That's what makes this so hard to explain to people who grew up in normal families. You don't see the pattern being built. Every time you say yes when you want to say no, it just feels like love. Every time you absorb someone's chaos so they don't have to, it just feels like family. It's only when you're sitting in a gray interrogation room under fluorescent lights that make everyone look like they're already dead that you suddenly see the architecture of it, the way it was built, the way you were built to fit inside it. Fiona called me on a Sunday afternoon in October. I was at the farmer's market 2 blocks from my apartment in Asheville, North Carolina, looking at winter squash and trying to decide if I was the kind of person who made soup from scratch. My phone buzzed. Her name on the screen made my stomach do a small, tired thing it always did. Like a dog that's been kicked enough times to flinch at a raised hand even when it's just someone reaching for a glass. I answered anyway. I need you. Her voice was stretched tight, like a rubber band held at both ends. Caleb and I had a fight, a bad one. I need to get out of the house, and I can't take Theo with me. He'll just ask questions, and I just need a few hours. Can you take him? Theo was 4. He had his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubbornness and a laugh like a small, startled bird. I loved him in the specific, helpless way you love a child who didn't choose any of the adults in his life. Of course, I said. Because I always said of course. I'll drop him off in an hour. Don't tell Caleb. I should have asked about that last part, the don't tell Caleb. I should have asked about that last part. I should have said, wait, if you're just taking a drive to cool down, why does it matter if Caleb knows Theo is with me? But Fiona had a way of delivering information in packages that felt complete even when they were missing something essential. And I had spent years teaching myself not to look too closely at the seams. An hour later, her white Lexus pulled up in front of my building. Theo got out holding a stuffed dog and wearing a long-sleeved shirt that was wrong for the weather. It was 60 degrees and sunny, the kind of October day that feels like a gift. And he was dressed like he was going somewhere cold. He walked toward me with his eyes on the sidewalk. When I bent down to hug him, he went rigid for just a second. Not the way tired kids go rigid. A different kind. The kind that means the body has learned to brace. I looked up at Fiona. She was already talking, already reaching back into the car for his overnight bag, already filling the air with words so I couldn't slip a question in between them. He hadn't been sleeping well. Don't let him have juice after 6. He might have a small fever. Nothing serious. She'd call me when she figured things out. She'd be back by tomorrow night at the latest. She drove away before I could ask why he needed an overnight bag for a few hours. I noticed the bruise when I was giving him a bath that evening. It was on his ribs, yellowish green, which meant it was several days old. The size and shape was something I recognized from my years in pediatric nursing and tried, very hard, not to think about directly. I sat back on my heels on the bathroom tile and I looked at my nephew, and I felt something happen in my chest that I don't have a clean word for. It was rage and grief and a terrible, specific kind of recognition, because I had seen that bruise before in my professional life and I knew what it usually meant. And I also knew that knowing what it meant and doing something about it were two different and terrifying things. "Does that hurt?" I asked him quietly. He looked down at it, then back at me. "I fell," he said. The words were practiced. The flatness of them was practiced. I washed his hair and put him in pajamas and read him 2 books and waited until he was asleep before I sat on the edge of my couch and stared at my phone for 45 minutes. I called Caleb. Voicemail. I called Fiona. Voicemail. I texted my mother. "Hey, have you talked to Caleb and Fiona today? Everything okay with them?" She responded 20 minutes later, "Yes. Why?" I put my phone face down on the coffee table and I thought about what I was going to do. And the honest answer, the one I'm ashamed of even now, is that what I did was nothing. Not because I didn't care, because I cared so much and I was so afraid of what happened in my family when someone made waves that I told myself I would wait until morning, get more information, handle it carefully. I told myself the bruise might have an innocent explanation. I told myself I needed more before I did something that couldn't be undone. I was still the fixer, and fixers manage the situation. They don't blow it up. The next morning, Theo woke up and ate cereal and watched cartoons and didn't talk much. I made him a birthday cake because his birthday was that Friday and I'd already bought the ingredients. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and warm sugar, and I was trying very hard to make things feel normal. That was when the door came off its hinges. Not literally, but almost. The knock was the kind that means we will knock it down if you don't open it, and when I did open it, there were 2 uniformed officers and a detective in a gray jacket who showed me a badge and told me they'd received a report of a missing child. I had flour on my hands. I remember that clearly. I'd been leveling off a measuring cup. "He's right here," I said. "He's watching TV." Fiona asked me to. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to step outside." I looked past them and saw Fiona's Lexus parked at the end of my street. And I saw Caleb standing next to it, arms crossed, looking at the sidewalk. And I saw my mother standing on the passenger side, one hand pressed to her mouth, shaking her head slowly like she was watching something inevitable. And then Fiona came around from the driver's side and pointed at me and screamed. I won't repeat exactly what she said. The relevant part is that according to her, I had taken Theo without permission, had been threatening to take him for months because I was obsessed and unstable and had never gotten over not being able to have children of my own, and that she had been terrified to report it because she didn't know what I might do. My mouth was open. No sound was coming out. The detective asked me to come with him. I went. Here is something they don't show you in legal dramas. What happens to your body when the collective authority of law enforcement and family and social proof all point at you and say you are the problem? Your nervous system doesn't respond with righteous indignation. It responds with collapse, with a heaviness so complete that you stop being a person fighting and become just a body being moved from one location to another. I sat in the back of the patrol car and watched my apartment building get smaller through the rear window. I didn't cry. I just felt a slow, spreading cold, like something vital had been switched off. At the station, they put me in a room with a metal table and a detective who introduced himself as Detective Hargrove. He had kind eyes, which is the most dangerous kind to have in that profession, because you keep wanting to trust them. He laid photographs on the table between us. The first one was a screenshot of a text thread. My name at the top. Message after message, increasingly threatening. "I'll take him myself if you don't let me see him. You're an unfit mother, and I'll prove it. You can't keep me away from him forever." I stared at my name above those words. I'd never sent them. "Can you explain these?" Hargrove asked. "I didn't send those. They came from your number. They didn't come from me." He nodded, writing something. The second photograph was of Theo's bruised ribs. "His mother says you did this." Something snapped back into place in my brain, cold and sudden, like a rubber band. "I'm a pediatric nurse," I said. "That bruise is at minimum 4 days old. I've had him for less than 24 hours. You can verify the time of his drop-off with the security camera at my building entrance." Hargrove looked at me for a moment. "I want a lawyer," I said. "Right now." I'm not answering anything else without a lawyer. This time I didn't collapse. Maybe it was the bruise on Theo's ribs. Maybe it was seeing my brother standing on that sidewalk looking away from me, choosing her without even flinching. Maybe something in me had finally stopped being surprised by any of it, and surprise was the only thing that had been keeping me quiet all these years. I folded my hands on the metal table and I waited. What I didn't know, while I was sitting in that room, was what was happening in the hallway outside it. Fiona's sister, a woman named Georgia who I'd met exactly twice at Christmas dinners, had driven 4 hours to the station that morning after getting a frantic call from Fiona the night before. Fiona had called her to brag. Not to confess, not to ask for help, to brag. She'd told Georgia the whole thing, the fake texts, the plan to report Theo missing, the intention to use the situation to get a pity settlement, and the divorce from Caleb that she'd been planning for months. She'd needed to tell someone how clever she'd been. She thought Georgia would be impressed. Georgia was not impressed. Georgia was, as it turned out, someone who had spent 2 years in family court fighting for custody of her own children after an abusive marriage. She knew exactly what Fiona was describing. She knew what it cost. And she had the sense, or the decency, or maybe just the old-fashioned anger, to walk directly into the police station and ask to speak to whoever was handling the case involving a woman named me. She had her phone. She had the voicemails Fiona had left her the night before, talking through the whole scheme in enough detail to make Hargrove's jaw visibly tighten when he listened to them. I didn't know any of this until it was already over. They brought me back into the room after it felt like 2 hours, but was probably 40 minutes. Hargrove set his recorder on the table. He didn't look at me with the flat professional assessment he'd had before. He looked a little like a man who has just realized the map he's been following is for a completely different territory. We've received some additional information, he said carefully, that we need to go through with you. He played me the voicemails. Fiona's voice, loose and pleased with herself, filling the small gray room, talking about the text she'd had spoofed from a number that mimicked mine, talking about the timeline she'd constructed, how she'd coached Theo on what to say, how she'd told Caleb that I'd become obsessed and dangerous and that this was his chance to finally do something about me, talking about the bruise on Theo's ribs with a casualness that made me grip the edge of the table. She hadn't inflicted it, she said. She'd just not prevented it. And then she'd seen an opportunity. I sat very still and listened to my sister-in-law describe engineering my arrest, and I felt something strange. Not the rage I would have expected. A kind of grief, actually. For Theo, mostly. For 4 years old and already knowing to say I fell in that flat, practiced voice. For the particular cruelty of being a child in a household where your bruises were a resource to be managed. The child has been taken into protective custody, Hargrove told me. We'll need your full account of the events of the past 48 hours. I gave it, all of it, including the bruise I'd seen the night before and hadn't reported, which is the part I still carry, the weight of that particular choice. The hour I sat with my phone face down and waited. They released me that afternoon. I drove back to my apartment and sat in my car for a long time before going inside. The birthday cake was still on my counter, finished now by no one, the frosting I'd been in the middle of applying still in the bowl. The fluorescent tube over the sink was buzzing the way it had been for 3 weeks, and I kept forgetting to replace it. Everything was exactly the same as it had been that morning and completely different at the same time. My phone had 17 missed calls. 3 from my mother, 1 from my father, which surprised me enough that I stared at it for a moment. 12 from numbers I didn't recognize, which I later learned were relatives who had heard from my mother, who had heard from Caleb, who had heard whatever version of events Fiona had had time to construct before everything came apart. My brother called me that evening. I answered because I didn't trust myself not to, and I thought I might as well do it now. I didn't know, he said. It was the first thing he said. You were standing on the sidewalk. She told me you'd gone off the deep end. She'd been building the case for months. I thought. He stopped. I looked away. I know. I looked away. I thought about the car crash at 17. The loan application. The years of everyone looking away while Caleb moved through consequence-free. I thought about how we teach people what to expect from us. Where's Theo? I asked. Foster placement. Temporarily. Until I'm applying to be his emergency placement. I said. I have the nursing background, a stable income, and I miss family. I'm going to do it tomorrow morning. Caleb was quiet. I'm not asking for permission, I said. I'm telling you. Fiona was charged with filing a false police report, witness tampering for coaching Theo, and child endangerment for her role in the circumstances around the bruise, which investigators traced back to her boyfriend, a man who had been in her life for 8 months and who Caleb had not known about. The charge carries sentences that, depending on how the DA decided to stack them, could mean anywhere from 2 to 12 years. She pled down. She got 4 years. Caleb's attorney made sure the divorce settlement reflected the full scope of what she'd orchestrated. My mother called me 3 times before I answered. When I did, she said I should have seen it sooner, which is as close to an apology as she has ever come in my direction. I told her I appreciated that. I meant it, and I also knew it wasn't enough, and I also knew that I no longer needed it to be enough. My father sent me a card, an actual card, in the mail, handwritten. I put it in the drawer where I keep things I'm not sure what to do with yet. Theo came to live with me on a Wednesday in November, 8 weeks after all of it, wearing a backpack with a cartoon rocket ship on it that some kind social worker had clearly picked out for him. He stood in my doorway and looked at my apartment like he was trying to decide if it was safe. I got down to his level. You know what I was thinking? I said. I was thinking we never finished that birthday cake. He looked at me for a long moment with those dark eyes. It has sprinkles? He asked. It can have sprinkles? I said. He came inside. That was 14 months ago. Theo is 5 now. He's in kindergarten at the school 4 blocks away, and he comes home talking about a boy named Felix, who he is deeply invested in impressing, and a teacher who lets them do projects with real clay. And the fact that he has definitively decided that carrots are only acceptable if something is dipping them. He sleeps through the night. He stopped flinching when I reach for things. 2 months ago, out of nowhere, while we were watching a movie, he climbed into my lap and just stayed there. And I held still and didn't make a big deal out of it and stared at the screen and felt something very quietly rearrange itself inside me. I'm still a nurse. I took a leave of absence during the worst of it and went back in the spring. I have spent the past year advocating, loudly, at every meeting and training I can get into, for better protocols around identified bruising in pediatric patients, about what it costs when we wait to be sure, about what I knew and didn't report and what I would do differently. Because that's the part I have to live with. Not Fiona. Not my brother standing on the sidewalk, the hour I sat with my phone face down on the coffee table and waited. I don't wait anymore. My parents and I are in a careful, provisional kind of contact. Sunday phone calls, sometimes. I have learned to receive them the way you receive weather. Something that happens to you, that you can prepare for, that you don't take personally. Caleb and I are something I don't have a word for yet. He shows up. He has Theo every other weekend, and he's trying, genuinely trying, in the way that people try when they have been forced by catastrophe to see themselves clearly for the first time. I watch him with Theo, and I see something that might eventually grow into something real. I don't rush it. I don't need to anymore. Here is what I want you to know, if you've listened this far. There are families that teach you your silence is love, that keeping the peace is your highest calling, that the way you absorb everyone else's chaos without complaint is a virtue. And for a long time, you believe them because you're inside the system and the system tells you this is how things are supposed to work. But there's a moment. If you're lucky, there's a moment where you see it clearly. The architecture of it, the way it was built, the way you were built to fit inside it. And you understand that you are not the glue holding things together. You are the floor everyone has been standing on, assuming you'll hold. I am not the floor anymore. I'm the woman who asked for a lawyer. I'm the woman who said out loud to my brother, I'm not asking for permission, I'm telling you. I'm the woman who Theo crawls into the lap of, now, on movie nights, like it's the most natural thing in the world. Justice wasn't the verdict. Justice is the Tuesday morning when nobody is screaming, and a 5-year-old is telling me very seriously that Felix is not as good at building with blocks as him, and the fluorescent light over the kitchen sink is finally fixed, and everything is ordinary. And ordinary is the most extraordinary thing I have ever had. If this story found you, share it. Every person trained to be the floor deserves to know they can choose to be something else. I used to think that being dependable was the same thing as being good. that picking up every phone call, absorbing every crisis, smoothing over every ugly thing before anyone else had to see it, that all of that meant something. That it made me a good sister, a good aunt, a good person. What I know now is that it made me useful, and useful is not the same thing as valued. When Fiona stood at the end of my driveway and pointed at me and screamed, she was counting on something she had spent years confirming, that I would not fight back, that the same conditioning that made me say yes every time she called, that made me take Theo without asking questions, that made me sit in a police car in silence, that same conditioning would keep me quiet in that interrogation room. She had studied me the way people study a system they intend to exploit. She knew exactly how I worked. What she didn't account for was the bruise on Theo's ribs. That's where her calculation broke down. Not because I'm braver than I thought, or stronger, or any of the things we say in stories like this to make the ending feel earned. It broke down because she hurt a child. And somewhere underneath all those years of keeping the peace and swallowing the truth and managing other people's messes, there was something in me that had a limit. I didn't know the limit was there until I hit it. That's what I want to say to anyone who recognizes themselves in this story. You don't have to know where your limit is in advance. You don't have to have it figured out before the moment arrives. The limit exists. It's already in you. What matters is that when the moment comes, you don't talk yourself out of it. You don't tell yourself you need more information, more time, more certainty. You act on what you know. I waited 1 hour the night I saw that bruise. 1 hour with my phone face down on the coffee table, telling myself I'd handle it in the morning. I will carry that hour for the rest of my life, not as punishment but as instruction. Because the truth is that most of the damage that gets done in families like mine doesn't happen in the dramatic moments. It happens in the quiet ones. In the hour you decide to wait. In the question you decide not to ask. In the call you decide not to make. The dramatic moment is just when the accounting comes due. Caleb is trying. I watch him with Theo on weekends and I see a man working very hard to become someone he should have been years ago. I don't say that with contempt. I say it with something more complicated. A kind of tired hope that I'm choosing, deliberately, to tend. Because Theo needs his father. And because I believe, with some effort, that people can grow into the weight of what they've done if they're willing to actually carry it instead of handing it to someone else. Fiona made choices. Every step of that plan was a choice. The spoof texts, the coach silence, the bruise she filed away as useful. Each one of those choices built the next one, and the next, until she was standing in a police station lobby thinking she had won. What undid her wasn't luck. It was the simple, stubborn fact that she had told the truth to someone who wasn't willing to protect her lie. You can build an elaborate deception, but you cannot control every person in the chain. Someone, somewhere, will have a limit too. I am not the floor anymore. I said that at the end of my story and I meant it, but I want to be specific about what it means in practice. It means I ask the question now. It means I make the call. It means that when Theo looks up at me from the couch on a Tuesday night and says, completely out of nowhere, I like living here. I don't deflect it or minimize it or look away. I just say, I like you living here too. And I let it be true out loud. That's the whole thing, really. Letting the true things be true out loud